Part 1, Chapter 14, Part 1. Chapter 14, Part 1, page 500. Training diet components, macronutrients. Chapter 14. Carbohydrate. The fuel burn during exercise depends on the intensity and duration of the activity being performed. As intensity increases, so does the contribution of carbohydrates as an energy source. If blood glucose cannot be stabilized, performance intensity must decrease. Since carbohydrate availability is a limiting factor in selecting activities, selective activities, it should be clear that it is a primary fuel source during physical activity and is critical for optimal performance. Athletes typically train and compete at 65% or more of the VO2 max. At this level, carbohydrate is the predominant fuel. Muscle glycogen that is stored carbohydrate is the major source of carbohydrate in the body, followed by liver glycogen and blood glucose. Muscle glycogen can be depleted within 2 hours of exercise, and liver glycogen stores can be depleted by a 15-hour fast. With such limiting stores of carbohydrates, it makes sense that the greater the pre-exercise glycogen content, the longer an athlete can exercise. So by consuming adequate carbohydrate and energy, the training athlete can delay the onset of fatigue caused by glycogen depletion. Caution: an athlete who exercises in a carbohydrate depleted state experiences larger increase in stress hormones and greater disturbances of many immune function indicators. By consuming carbohydrate during exercise, one can limit exercise-induced immunosuppression. Carbohydrate recommendations for athletes range from 6 to 10 grams kilogram a day, whereas the typical American diet provides 4 to 5 grams kilogram per pound per body. Recommended intake for endurance training are slightly higher than general training needs. Ultra endurance athletes, for example, those involved in exercise lasting longer than 4 hours, require the highest intake at 11 grams per pound, 11 grams kilogram a day or more. Outlines daily, table 14.3 outlines daily carbohydrate recommendations. Carbohydrate-containing food can be categorized by the type of form of carbohydrate or its glycemic index. A food can be said to have a low, moderate, or high GI. The GI indicates the effect of the food or fluid on circulating blood glucose and insulin levels. High GI foods cause a rapid rise in blood glucose and subsequent release of insulin, while low glycemic index foods cause a slower, more gradual rise in blood glucose and a blunted insulin response. For example, sports drinks and potatoes have a high glycemic index, whereas milk and apples have a low glycemic index. The GI can be a useful tool when the rate of digestion and absorption is important. For example, in the post-exercise period, an athlete wants to ingest foods and fluids that are digested and absorbed quickly to help enhance muscle recovery and glycogen repletion. Foods with higher GI are digested and digested and thus absorbed more quickly than lower GI foods. Hence, the more rapid rise in blood glucose. Daily carbohydrate intakes and recommendations for athletes. Typical U.S. intake, 4 to 5 grams, kilograms a day. General training needs, 5 to 7 grams a kilogram. Endurance, 7 to 10. And ultra endurance, 11 grams per kilogram. Perhaps the most famous performance enhancing strategy related to carbohydrate intake is glycogen supercompensation, i.e. carbohydrate loading. Carbohydrate loading can almost double muscle glycogen concentrations, which can ultimately influence endurance potential. It is most effective for athletes performing intense, continuous endurance activities lasting longer than 90 minutes. To achieve glycogen supercompensation, one must allow 2 to 6 days for increase to take place. Athletes consume a typical mixed diet on the first 3 days and then progress to a high carbohydrate diet for 3 days before competition. Figure 14.1 illustrates carbohydrate loading recommendations. When working with athletes, it is important to be sure they understand the important food sources of carbohydrates. No discussion of carbohydrate would be complete without mentioning fiber, which can be considered as a non-digestible carbohydrate. Though fiber does not supply a significant amount of fuel to the body, it is beneficial for improving gut and overall health. Gut health affects how well nutrients are absorbed and is connected with healthy immune function. A healthy immune system can mean the difference between a healthy player on the field or a sick player on the bench. In fact, some of the health consequences of fiber intake have shown a direct effect on an athlete's competition. For example, many marathon runners suffer from upper respiratory tract infections, URTI, post-marathon, most likely due to the stress on the body and consequent immunosuppression. Supplementation with beta-glucans, a type of fiber, significantly reduced the incidence of the upper respiratory infection. Protein. The protein needs of an athlete receive considerable interest and attention. Protein requirements, as well as supplementation of individual amino acids and specific protein types, have been the primary areas of focus. Given the important functions of proteins, it is easy to see why athletes are so concerned. A few key roles of proteins are supporting growth and maintenance of body tissue, especially muscle, synthesizing enzymes, hormones, and other peptides, building antibodies, protein, maintaining fluid and electrolyte balance, protein, repairing exercise-associated muscle damage, protein does, providing energy and glucose. Protein contributes to energy both at rest and during exercise. But in fed individuals, protein likely provides less than 5% of expended energy. However, As exercise duration increases and glycogen levels fall, protein may help sustain blood glucose levels via liver gluconeogenesis. Dietary protein, gluconeogenesis definition, a metabolic pathway that results in the generation of glucose from non-carbohydrate carbon substances such as pyruvate, lactate, glycerol, and glucogenic amino acids. Dietary protein requirements reflect the need to balance daily turnover and losses. Proteins are continually being synthesized and degraded. Therefore, assessing and meeting needs is an important component of an athlete's diet. The type, intensity, and duration of activity are important variables that can induce significant changes in protein turnover. Another important factor is energy balance. Negative energy balance, where calories expended exceed calories ingested, must be avoided to prevent protein from being used as an energy source. The need to repair exercise-related muscle damage, support lean mass gains, and replace proteins used as energy are a few reasons athletes have increased requirements. Resistance exercise needs are greater than those of endurance exercise. Strength and power athletes should consume 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body mass per day. The protein tissue accrual rate is limited. Endurance athletes are generally recommended to ingest 1.2 to 1.4 kilograms of body mass a day, whereas the current dietary reference intake for protein is 0.8 kilograms of body mass per day. Sports performance professionals should also be aware that the need for protein may be higher during the first 3 to 6 months of training. When muscle hypertrophy rates are accelerated, despite the increased need for protein, the typical diets of most athletes provide sufficient intake. Too much protein could displace dietary carbohydrate below recommended levels, which would affect performance. Too much protein could displace dietary carbohydrate below recommended levels, which would affect performance. Dietary protein can be found in many different foods: meats, poultry, fish, eggs, beans, nuts, nut butters, milk, and other dairy foods. All contribute high quality protein to the training diet. There is no evidence that protein supplements are necessary for more effective in meeting an athlete's protein requirements than consuming protein from these standard food sources. However, protein supplements can be helpful under certain circumstances and be useful in many situations. Common forms of supplemental protein are whey and casein, and can be found in either isolated powder form or as a component of other products. Whey protein are often considered fast proteins due to the quick rise of plasma amino acids after consumption. Whey proteins are often considered fast proteins due to the quick rise of plasma amino acids after consumption. On the other hand, casein is often considered a slow protein because of its moderate, prolonged amino acid increase. This is helpful to know when considering the time of protein ingestion. Whey protein, the collection of globular proteins that can be isolated from whey, a byproduct of cheese manufactured from cow's milk. Whey has the highest biological value of any known protein. Casein, a predominant phosphoprotein that accounts for nearly 80% of proteins in milk and cheese. Example, page 503. The periods before and after a bout of resistance exercise are crucial for promoting muscle protein synthesis. Whey protein may be a wise choice during these periods given its quick absorption. The faster the amino acids can get into the body, the faster the body can reduce degeneration and facilitate synthesis. When considering protein sources from food or supplements, it is important to consider two concepts: essential amino acids and leucine specifically, an amino acid that drives muscle growth. There are 9 essential amino acids, which are the amino acids that must come from food since the body cannot synthesize them from other amino acids. Complete proteins contain all essential amino acids, and animal proteins, meat and dairy, are main sources of complete proteins. Many vegetables are incomplete, so they are best combined with each other or animal sources to ensure consumption of all essential amino acids. Leucine is one of the essential amino acids that signals the body to activate muscle protein synthesis and to lower muscle protein breakdown. For athletes to gain or maintain muscle mass, they must consider the amount of protein and leucine they are consuming regularly.